including through environmental justice, health justice, racial justice, and disability justice. We're excited to have four fabulous panelists who are working to improve our communities by improving transportation and mobility across Rhode Island, each of whom I'm going to introduce shortly. But first, just a couple quick logistics for this conversation. Please note we're recording this session as we intend to share it with interested folks who are not able to join us today. Second, if you have any questions or comments while one of our panelists is speaking, please feel free to utilize the chat and we'll try to incorporate it into the conversation. Also, towards the end of the session, we'll have an open Q&A during which you will have the floor to ask as many questions as our time allows. Third, I want to remind you that if you hear a phrase or an acronym or something that you're not familiar with, please ask about it in the chat. My colleague Allie will be watching the chat and will jump in to translate, explain as she's able. We really see this as a space for learning, so we really encourage everyone to do it as such. Fourth and finally, we'd love to get a sense of who is in the virtual room here with us. So please take a moment and introduce yourself in the chat and share your name, why you're joining us here today, anything that you'd like to kind of get the conversation going among you and your other peers who are joining us here. Great. Okay, so I'm going to now introduce our panelists. So today we're going to hear from Liza Burkin, who is the lead organizer for the Providence Streets Coalition. We'll also be hearing from Allyson, McCalla, the Director of Operations at Bike Newport and the lead partner for the Newport Health Equity Zone's Transportation Working Group. We'll also be hearing from John Flaherty, Deputy Director of Grow Smart Rhode Island. And finally, our own Lucy Berman, who is the Associate Director of Advocacy and Organizing for One Central Providence here at 1NB. Thank you all so much for being here. So I'm going to kick us right off with a question first to Liza. So as mentioned, Liza, you're the lead organizer for the Providence Streets Coalition, which is really focused on advancing mobility justice in Providence. Can you just talk about what mobility justice means to you and to the coalition and what that really looks like on a day-to-day basis to advance this work?
Everyone deserves.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name is Liza Burkin. I'm with the Providence Streets Coalition. We're a group that's been around since 2019. One Neighborhood Builders has been a wonderful partner, I think, pretty much that entire time. As well as Grow Smart, and we work closely with a lot of the folks, and Tina from Ramp is here, so many of our partners on the call this morning. It's wonderful to see you all. So mobility justice is the idea, is an intersectional way of looking at transportation and looking at facets of identity, including race, income, age, ability, and other facets of personal identity, and saying that those things should not affect how we move around our communities. I'm going to put a YouTube video in the chat right here was created by the National Safe Routes to School Partnership. That is like 2.5 minutes that I think is like a really, really deep and short but deep and important primer on the concept of mobility justice and what it means. So I recommend checking that out. And I'm here primarily to talk about Save RIPTA today, which is the top priority of the Providence Streets Coalition right now, currently, as our public transit system is on the brink of a fiscal crisis. And we are working very hard to try to save it. So I'm going to put some other links in the chat about our campaign as well. And I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Liza. Really appreciate that. I now like to ask John to chime in here. So John at Grow Smart Rhode Island, your organization works across the state on issues related to transportation and mobility. Can you talk about why that matters? Why do we care about mobility? What is it? How does it really impact ourselves, our neighbors, and our communities?
Wow. Well, thank you, Grace. And so glad to be here with everybody. I love this Fresh Fridays program. This is I just think it's a great way to engage folks. Transportation and I mean, what does it mean? I mean, it means everything. right? I mean, when we talk about whether it's public transportation or having safe places to walk and bike in your community, this is about, first and foremost mobility, but it's also access to work, to school, to food, healthcare. I mean, really all of life's essentials. And there's 10% of our state's population that doesn't have access to a personal car. And so these other ways of getting around are vital. And we didn't even mention yet climate and the impact on climate. And we know that we are not currently on track to meet those very aggressive carbon reduction goals by the next benchmark in 2030. And we know that some of these tools, that strategies like the Transit Master Plan, plays an outsized role in helping the state to get there. So, I mean, it's just vital. It's public health. So the extent to which people can walk in their community safely and confidently, or bike safely and confidently. Every person who is a transit rider is a pedestrian as well. So it's leading a more active lifestyle, which is critical for public health. So it's everything.
Thank you so much. I have a feeling we're going to be circling back around to a few of those topics that you and Liza both raised here at the start of the call around health and climate and equity, and how all these things are so interrelated with this topic we're working on today. I want to next give Allyson an opportunity to introduce themselves a little bit further and talk about the work of Bike Newport and the Newport Health Equity Zone Transportation Working Group. I'm specifically hoping, Allyson, that you could maybe talk about one of your recent wins as an organization. You've been working so hard in Newport's North End, especially. Would love to hear something that you're really excited about that having got off the ground.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. My name's Allyson. I'm the Director of Operations here at Bike Newport, as well as the lead facilitator for Newport Heads Transportation Group. We also started up the first chapter of Black Girls Do Bike in Rhode Island, and that just bringing more awareness to women of color, letting people know that we're out here and we're riding. But yeah, so I think one of the things that we are really proud of that we've been working on with the Transportation Working Group is the first bus to the beach from Newport's North End. Newport, I say it all the time, we're in the ocean state, we're the city by the sea, and our families in the North End can see the water, but they couldn't get there. And so for a few years, we were trying to get this bus to the beach going, and it just kept on being placed on the back burner. So what we actually did was reach out to RIPTA directly and sat down and kind of talked to their directors and their planning department on how we can get this bus to the beach. So the Transportation Working Group, we mapped out a route with RIPTA. We jumped on a bus and we actually went by every housing development, not just in the North End, but all the housing developments in Newport, made a bus stop there so that these families who don't have access to transportation, as far as like motor vehicles, were able to get to the water. I think that we had a bike camp one year, and one of the kids said that they had never been to the beach before. So that is kind of what just made us skip all the other, the city government. We just went straight to RIPTA, and it was like, this is something that needs to happen. So we're super excited about that bus to the beach. Fast forward, so that was inaugurated actually on Juneteenth, 2021 was the very first ride to the beach. But right now, and I think that Liza is probably going to talk a little bit about the Save RIPTA campaign, but they are eliminating some bus routes. And one of the bus routes they're eliminating is the bus to the beach. And after the first year of inauguration in 2021, the second year, we actually made a few more stops because there wasn't transportation for families to get to mental health services, or to get to daycare, to get to the Department of Human Services where they receive services. And if you can't get to there to make your meeting, then your services are cut off. So those are one of the lines that they're thinking about cutting. So right now we're really working vigorously to get more advocates out there and show that there is a need to get these individuals to their services.
Thank you so much. Love hearing that example, and really timely to talk about how it's so interconnected with some of the challenges that we're going to come back around to Liza too shortly here. But before doing so, want to ask my colleague Lucy to chime in. So Lucy, you facilitate the Central Providence Opportunities Health Equity Zone working groups along with your colleagues, including those focused on health and housing and education. I'd just love to hear a little bit about how transportation and mobility really comes up in these conversations and what you're learning about the needs in the communities in which you work.
Thank you for the question, Grace, and thank you to all of the other panelists for already saying a lot of what I wanted to say about the working groups and how transportation relates to health equity, which I don't think is really a surprise to anybody on this call. But just a little bit of background, through CPO Heads, we convened 6 working groups on health, housing, employment, business development, education, and community power. And within each one, we've been looking to identify key policy priorities that we can pursue in both the short and long term, and also look at those common threads that are coming up across all of those issue areas, all of those social determinants of health. And again, surprising probably no one on this call, transportation is one of those topics that's come up time and time again in every single working group. And it's been fascinating to be able to have so many conversations about transportation equity from so many different angles, from the perspective of having to be able to get to work on time and therefore have job stability. Or we know a lot of young people in Central Providence rely on public transportation to get to school. And we also know that Providence has really high rates of chronic absenteeism. So when you're talking about kids being able to get a quality education, you're also talking about transportation. So as a common thread, when we're talking about health equity, transportation keeps coming up. I'd also say something that is really exemplifies the importance of transportation to how folks in Central Providence think about health and safe communities. We, as you may know, had a participatory budgeting process that we carried out last spring. And we asked residents of the 02908 and 02909 zip codes how they would want to spend $1 million to improve health in their communities. There were 20 projects on the ballot. 8 ended up being voted in. And of those 8, 2 had to do with transportation. One was about improving bus stops in Central Providence, and the other was about bike distribution and education on bike repair. So that says a lot. When people were asked, what would you spend money on to make your community healthier and safer? People said safe transportation. So we're seeing it a lot. I'm really happy to be here and hear from the other panelists, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Really appreciate you sharing that and highlighting some of the things that we were talking a little bit about bus transportation, which we are going to talk a little bit more about as well, but appreciate you also kind of broadening the set of things that are within that category of mobility and transportation options, bikes and safe pedestrian walkways, which John also mentioned. So I would now like to turn back to Liza. And of course, you mentioned the Save RIPTA campaign, which is top of mind for many folks on this call, really related to the future of public transportation in the state. So if you could talk a little bit about what you would like to see for the sort of public transportation, the future of public transportation in Rhode Island, and what it might look like for us to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lucy, I'm so glad you brought up the school attendance issue. So in this action form that I put in the chat, that is like one of the first things that we say. So it's very frustrating for us to see the governor in his State of the State speech in January, and then in subsequent media interviews, and with a subsequent rollout of all focused on school attendance, this whole like attendance matters campaign that they're doing right now. Talk about the importance of it, and then still leave an $8 million deficit for RIPTA in the budget, which is how Providence students get to school. It's like, well, what? So I think, talking about the school attendance issue and how it relates to public transit is something that can really, really help this campaign, and just pointing out the obvious gap there. And that is outlined in our action form, which is in the chat. So I'll highlight something, a good example. So last night, so I live in Elmwood. Last night, I was trying to go to a fundraiser for one of our legislative allies, David Morales, in Olneyville. And I was looking at my trip times, what I had available to me to get there. It would have taken 9 minutes to drive, 14 minutes to bike, and 36 minutes to take the bus. I would have had to take the bus from my house in Elmwood all the way into Kennedy Plaza and then all the way back out to Olneyville, which is like basically it's like a triangle and there's no hypotenuse for the triangle. So like the actual shortest distance was not available. And I ended up driving because it was wicked cold last night too. I was planning to be out late. So in that sense, what I am trying to see is making public transportation and taking the bus competitive with driving in terms of trip times. That's it. That's the basic thing, you know. Until it is when the trip times that are offered are like more than double, sometimes triple what it takes to drive somewhere. It's not a competitive option, and it's going to. And what it results in is only people using it who don't have any other options. And mobility choices, walking, biking, scooting, skating, wheeling, driving, and the bus, the train, the ferry, it's like a toolbox, right? And you, for different jobs, you need different tools. And I like to think of the car as the sledgehammer, the heaviest, the most destructive tool in the toolbox. And it's really the only one that we have a fully developed system for. So sometimes you need a wrench, or sometimes you need just a really small little hammer or a level or something. And those tools aren't available because they haven't been developed. And so what the Streets Coalition, what Grow Smart, what Bike Newport, what we're all trying to do is develop those tools, the biking, the walking, the transit, the wheeling, the rolling options to be more competitive with driving. And, you know, because driving is the most expensive option. It's the most harmful to the environment. It's the most harmful to other human beings. It's the most harmful to our cities. It gobbles up all the land that we could be where we're storing cars. People in our community, instead of parking, we call it car storage because cars are empty like 95% of the time. They're sitting on the street. They're sitting in a backyard that could be green. You know, we could really get rid of most of them and share. We could do more sharing of cars. There's so many options for ways that we could rebalance our systems. So that's what we're really looking for. Specifically, so that's like kind of long-term vision. Specifically right now, the Save RIPTA campaign is fighting for a $78 million budget appropriation on top of the $10 million that the governor actually put in the budget. And so 8 million of that would go to just closing the gap. Right now, there is a gap in the budget. Like RIPTA will not be able to operate if there's not more money. That will mean more service cuts. So 8 million is for that. 24 million is for supporting our drivers. So right now, the service cuts that are being planned right now have more to do with a driver shortage because we have not been paying bus drivers and a living wage as the cost of everything has risen. You know, the cost of housing, the cost of groceries. We've been paying starting drivers only $21 an hour up until just last week. They finally created a new contract. And so now starting wage for bus drivers is $25 an hour. They are also going to pay for people's commercial driving license or CDL training, which has a value of $10,000. I'm going to put RIPTA's career page in the chat. If you know anyone who is looking for a secure union job, we really need more bus drivers, and I am working to try to increase Spanish outreach. Unfortunately, the CDL test itself is a state and federal requirement that is only in English. So that is a huge barrier and something that we really need to work on as a community, I think, to increase access. And that I would love to I only learned about this problem yesterday, so it's top of mind for me. And then the rest of the money, the 46 million in that budget bill, is to actually expand service, expand rather than cut. So that's something that like could one day make it possible for that hypotenuse, for my example, from Elmwood to Olneyville, a direct bus route that is not dependent on going into Kennedy Plaza. So so expansion of service means more hours, more routes, going more places, more frequency. So a bus is coming every 5 minutes rather than every 20 minutes. Again, making it competitive with driving.
Thank you so much, Liza, and appreciate you kind of boiling that down to its most core sort of purpose. And it is very compelling and helpful, I think, for folks who maybe are interested in and care about the topic, but are sort of trying to wrap their arms around it. So appreciate you doing so. I want to turn now to John. So Liza talked about some of the solutions that might improve mobility options, about further funding and expanding our public transportation system. GrowSmart works so much on broader policy and systems level work. And one thing that's talked about a fair bit, especially in the circles in which One Neighborhood Builders works, which is housing and community development, is transit-oriented development. Could you talk a little bit about what that means? And if we had more of it in this state, what would it look like?
Sure. Yeah. And I just want to say that, Liza, you totally nailed it in sort of teeing that up about the importance and sort of the state of transit. And before I talk about TOD a little bit, I just want to add some additional context because RIPTA has been a grossly underfunded agency for decades. And that's why it takes people 2, 3, sometimes 4 times as long to get where you're going, because it's always been funded just enough to sort of keep the status quo. And so the hope is that we've had this transit master plan, this vision for the future of transit now. It went through a 2-year development process with a lot of public input and engagement, but it's been adopted now for over 3 years, and there still hasn't been any commitment to implementing it. So we're hoping that this is going to be the year. The bill that Liza's worked on with Rep. Elzate would actually get us on the path, not only to just to avoiding the deficit and service cuts because of it, but also making the first annual investment in implementing the transit master plan, because it would make a huge difference. And you step back and look at the whole system, we're one of the few states that has this opportunity. Rhode Island is the second most urbanized state in the country. So we've got the built-in density, we've got the bones really to support a high quality transit system. One of the fun facts that I like to share is that in terms of the number of people who can have access to transit in our state, it's a huge number. Like 77% of our state's population can walk out their front door and be at a transit stop in 10 minutes, which is just an extraordinary number. But so few people use it for the exact reason that Liza pointed out, which is that people are always going to make the rational choice about how to get where they're going. And last night you made the rational choice. It was cold. It was going to take you a lot longer to get where you're going. And so it was a no-brainer. You drove, and anybody who had access to a car would have done the same thing. But it doesn't have to be that way is the point. So shifting gears and talking about transit-oriented development, where GrowSmart works is sort of the intersection of economic development, land use, housing, transportation, natural resource conservation. How do we use the resources that we have in the state efficiently for all the things that we need out of community? And one of the growing opportunities, and I think Rhode Island's just beginning to really catch on to this, is this concept of transit-oriented development. And it's a combination of having the zoning in place to encourage denser development in places where you have access to transit. And one good example of that is in Pawtucket, and it's right adjacent to the new Pawtucket Central Falls Transit Hub, which just opened last year. And the city just recently approved a 180-unit apartment development adjacent to it. And they did it with only 80 parking spaces, which, I mean, when you think about development, typically the requirements call for 1.5 or 2+ parking spaces per unit. In this case, it was much lower. And the reason is because it's adjacent to transit. And so you didn't have to have as much parking. And what that means for the development is that it brings the cost of building that apartment complex down, because when you have to build the structured parking, you're looking at least $50,000 per space, which adds to the cost of building. And we've got a housing crisis. We need to build as much housing as we possibly can. And the question is, where are you going to be able to do that? How can you do that effectively? We're not going to win the housing battle because, another subdivision was built next to the last one in suburban communities. It's going to be within the urban core, within the urban ring, where you have high capacity or high volume transit corridors. Think like North Main Street in Providence as one example. Doesn't always have to be around a train station. It can be along corridors where you've got access to good transit, where people don't necessarily have to rely on a car. This isn't also about telling people, get rid of your cars. It's not about being anti-car, but it's about giving people choices, as Liza had talked about earlier. So if you're living in one of those locations, maybe your family can go from owning 3 cars to 2 or 2 cars to 1, and you can get by quite nicely that way. And what that means is it can put, for each car that you're able to get by without, it puts about $10,000 back into your family budget. So it's a win-win. These are examples of where 1 + 1 + 1 = 7, and we have to seek out these opportunities because we know what the cost of building housing is, and in many cases these projects don't pencil. And so you have to look at what are the costs involved, and how can some of those costs be brought down. And TOD is certainly one of them. And then it gives people the opportunity. I mean, most trips that people take are less than 3 miles. In fact, about half of them are less than a mile. But yet, I think that in many cases, even those trips are being taken with a car because people don't feel comfortable with walking on, as an example, North Main Street. North Main Street in Providence has got some real challenges. There's been a number of serious injuries and fatalities. And to the extent that those kinds of corridors are transformed, that include additional housing development, but safe walking and cycling infrastructure and much better transit. That's sort of the sweet spot going forward of where I think there's a lot of opportunity for the state.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask one final question of our panelists, and then we're going to open it up to the broader set of participants here for Q&A. So this one is for both Lucy and Allyson. Feel free to chime in as you see fit, because you both work very closely with health equity zones in Providence and in Newport. I'm interested in thoughts that either of you have about how, as this work moves forward, we can really center the voices of residents who have been most sort of systematically excluded from thinking about the future of mobility and transit in our communities. And if you have any examples or thoughts or ideas, would love to hear them.
Yeah, I think that it's important to, there's power in numbers. And I think that it's important to make sure that we're advocating for the things that we're passionate about. And so, like what John was saying and Liza, we're really focused on like the inequities of connectivity. And so finally, Newport has its first shared use path. And for those who aren't sure what those are, it's essentially a bike path, but call it a shared use path because it's not just for bikers, it's for anyone walking, jogging, wheelchair accessible, people pushing their strollers. And so essentially anything besides a motor vehicle. And so we're really concerned about the families that live in the North End. So that's a lot of the work that the Health Equity Zone does, is trying to make sure that there's equitable connectivity from Newport's North End to the South End. And so what we want to make sure is that individuals understand how they can be a part of this and how they can use their voice. And we really encourage individuals to come out to public forums. And it's really our residents. So we're always focused on trying to find resident consultants, because these are the individuals who are experiencing these inequities and are able to make the case and use their voice and, really speak on what the need is within their community. So I always encourage individuals to, go to their local government meetings, whether it's a school committee meeting or a city council meeting, and speak up and find out how you can be more engaged. And, there's plenty of ways you can outreach me here at Bike Newport, find your local BPAC, Bicycle and Pedestrian Commission, or even your local health equity zone. So those are just some of the ways that, we're really focused on trying to get more people involved in being advocates for things that they're passionate about.
I appreciate the question, and I'll keep my contribution to a brief. But I think that what is really exciting about this issue is the fact that it's coming up in each of these working groups, is the fact that there are so many angles to approach an argument for greater investment in public transportation and our avenues of access to that transportation, be it access to a bike and knowledge of how to build and repair that bike, or a quality bus stop to be able to get on a bus. And because there are so many of these ways in to the conversation about transportation, I think it's a really special opportunity to be collecting as many stories as we can at the HES level from people who are impacted by this and may not even realize the extent to which they would be impacted by things like budget cuts to RIPTA. So what we're trying to do on the HES level is really collect and elevate those stories and make sure that folks who are directly impacted are both in conversation with people who maybe don't live here but work in local nonprofits and are thinking about transportation, and of course also with legislators. So building as many pathways for those conversations as possible and really uplifting community experience.
Thank you both so very much. And now, as promised, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Allie Steinberg, who's going to facilitate an open Q&A for the last 10 minutes of our discussion here.
Thanks so much, Grace, and thank you all for such insightful comments. I think this was such a well-rounded and wide-ranging discussion, fitting of a wide-ranging topic. And so thank you all. And so want to open it up to Q&A. Feel free to type your question in the chat or come off mute and ask, or raise your hand and ask your question. This is truly, we want to make the space open. Give a couple seconds for questions to come in.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, this is Nada De Jesus, and my question was, I was interested in knowing how you are engaging the youth, especially those that utilize RIPTA to get to school. I wanted to sort of kind of hear your thoughts on how you go about utilizing their voices in this process.
Yeah, I can take that one. We're so grateful and excited to be partnering with a bunch of youth groups. So the youth groups that are the most active on the Save RIPTA campaign right now are the Providence Student Union and Young Voices RI. So we've done education sessions with both of those groups, started collecting their testimony. Their, Save RIPTA was in PSU's newsletter yesterday. So everyone who receives that newsletter got our action alert. I've been engaging with college groups at CCRI. Some of the CCRI lines are going to be cut as well. So student groups, CCRI, URI. So it is such an important piece of it. I would like to keep doing more. We also work a bit with Youth in Action on the South Side, although not as tight on this particular campaign. But yeah, youth have to be involved. And it's funny you asked that. I just put an article in the chat. There's a national group called the National Organization for Youth Safety that has a Transportation Equity Fellowship. And so there's some really great interviews with folks who are like 17 to 29 on the issue nationally. I really hope to be able to provide grant funding for like for Providence youth to go to that conference next year.
And I'll add another group that that we've engaged with is the Charette Charter School in downtown Providence. It's pretty amazing school that is, I think, one of the only ones, maybe the only one that is their theme. They're dedicated to urban development and historic preservation. So and it's right downtown, and they all rely on RIPTA, so they've become more engaged as well.
Awesome. I see Brenda's question in the comment, and then we'll go to Danny. Any comments on the new transit hub in Providence? And I would ask anyone who the first person to respond to this question to just give some context on what does this mean, the new transit hub? What is that? What's going on?
Want me to grab that one? And we can tag team on this, Liza. So this is something that has been ongoing, an issue that's been relevant for the last 10 plus years. There's been a movement to move the central hub out of Kennedy Plaza for a lot of reasons. The state had a bond referendum back in 2014 for investing in transit hub infrastructure, $35 million, which did pass with 60% of the vote. It was not specific to that particular project, but there's been a lot of movement that came in part from the city of Providence that supported some interests that wanted to see that moved. There's also a lot of riders that prefer to keep it right where it is. I think some riders are also open to having a full service indoor transportation terminal that includes amenities like you would expect if you were going to a train station or an airport, clean bathrooms, amenities, access to some retail, a cover from the elements, a place that you can wait to the extent you have to wait in a warm shelter. And but this issue of where it's located has really bubbled up because the latest, and apparently they're looking at a number of sites, but it seems to be that the favored site is somewhat remote. It's in the I-195 district. For those that know, that's where the Route 195 used to pass through, but it got relocated and it opened up land for development. This one is it abuts Route 95, sort of across from where Crossroads is, and it's far away from where a lot of transit riders are going, and people have been expressing a lot of concern about that. So we have serious concerns at Grossmart about that location, but we're open to the idea of a new hub if it's in the right location and it puts transit riders first. It's a given. And what we have said, at least at Grossmart, is we are asking the McKee administration to at least temporarily pause any further action on advancing a hub until the public is assured that the transit service itself is a priority. Because for anybody who's using transit, it's far more important to have the service than it is to have a new terminal facility. And we haven't seen that commitment yet from the governor or from the speaker or the Senate president. And those are the three people that have to come together in support preserving and enhancing transit service. And so while we have been a champion for having a better transit hub, we have to get our priorities straight first, and it starts with the service. I don't know if you want to add something to that,
John.
Liza.
Liza, I'm seeing you shaking your head that you don't want to say anything else. But I think that was awesome. Thank you for summarizing that timely and important issue. Danny, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, I have so many comments to make too. When you talk about the 195 land that's opened up, it's an important housing issue. And when we think about reparations and how transit is used to not serve people who are underserved, or to only have it to minimally supply that, we need to remember that that land and highways were built to disrupt communities of color. And we never talk about how that land that the city now owns has a history um, of displacing the Cape Verdean community. But so that when we talk about all of these things, we're not talking about how we're just plowing over these issues. Nada, I appreciated your comment about youth and having them being an important part of the conversation. And I was just thinking that, we've mentioned youth in Providence, but we haven't really mentioned youth in the rest of Rhode Island. And so I would wonder how we could get youth involved. We think Newport, think Woonsocket. These are places that are poorly served. And how do we have them part of that, a part of the conversation? That was my questions and thoughts.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danny. I think you raised some really important historical context, and also talking about something we didn't really talk about, which was highways, which is another form of transportation that has a troubling history of impacting especially Black and Brown communities. And Allyson, do you want to talk about engaging youth in Newport, recognizing we just have a couple minutes before we got to wrap up?
Yeah, of course. Finally we are in the Newport Public Schools, just kind of just teaching bicycle safety, whether it's surrounding mechanics or just using the road safely. So we have open garage hours where the youth can come in and work one-on-one with mechanics, just to learn more about how to fix up their own bikes, or to learn how to learn the rules of the road. And then also with the Health Equity Zone, the Newport Health Equity Zone, we're always looking for youth to become involved. So sometimes, the residence consultants are bringing in their children just to kind of learn more about how they can use their voice, and maybe even attract other individuals their age to come out and, just be a part of the change that we all want to see.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all. I saw that there was a question about Commerce's role, and Kate responded and was going to try to find out what Commerce's role is or could be. So thank you, Kate, for doing that. And as we're nearing 9:30, I just want to thank all of the participants and all of the panelists for your time, your insight, and your expertise this morning. We hope you will consider joining us at a future Fresh Friday. Our next one will be on April 5th, and it will be on some topics that we touched on today around the exact topic will be finalized soon. So be on the lookout for that, but on April 5th. And for those watching the recording, you can email me at Steinberg, STEINBERG, at 1nb.org to get notifications. And we will send out an email to everyone who registered for today's webinar with all the panelists' contact information and the links shared during the discussion, because we want to make sure that folks can stay engaged and not feel like they had to be monitoring the chat the whole time to get all that information. So thank you all. And I hope you have a great rest of your Friday. And I hope that this session was engaging and you learned something. So thank you all, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.